Structs, which are short for structures, let you name and package together related values into a single value so that you can deal with them as a single unit. Rust has three types of structs: a named field, tuple-like, and a unit-like. A named field struct gives a name to each component. A tuple-like struct identifies them by the order in which they appear, and a unit-like struct actually has no components at all, which might sound trivial, but we'll be able to make sense of that a little bit later on. But for now, let's start and look at a named field struct. So we create a struct by using the struct keyword and then the name that we want our struct to be. So notice that it is capitalized at the first character. This is known as camel case or Pascal case and is the desired format that Rust calls for in this situation. So we're creating a struct called user, and now we're going to give it some attributes. And notice how these are key pair values when we do this. So we're going to have active, and it's going to be a Boolean. We're going to have username as a string, and then we're going to say the sign-in count, and it'll be an unsigned 32 integer. So to create a user, let's say let user1 is equal to user. And this is where that key pair value comes into play. So we're going to say active true. So our key is active and our value is true. User name, and we're going to do string from Tyler. And then for our last one, we're going to say our sign-in count, which is our key, and then our value of 0. So how can we access any of this information? Well, we have what's known as the dot notation. So let's print out my username. So we're going to say user1 and then dot, and then now you can see that these attributes appear. So again, I wanted to print out my username, and this dot notation is how we can access the attributes inside of our struct. So now if we run it, I expect it to say Tyler, which is exactly what happened. Alright, so good. So something else that we can do is we can create a function that's going to build our user for us. So in here, we just want to pass in my username, and we want it to be a string, and then we want a user to be returned. So in here, we're going to return a user, and we're going to just leave username, and then we're going to have active as true, and then we're going to auto assign our sign-in count to 1. So what's happening here? So how come we don't have to assign anything to username? Well, it's smart enough to realize, hey, we have a username parameter and a username attribute. So it's automatically going to map those two together. So we don't have to have any logic down here to basically say, hey, username is username, because that's the same thing it's doing, but Rust is smart enough to do that, make that correlation for us. And then we're just going to go ahead and preset in these values for every user that we do this way. So let's go ahead and build a user. So we're going to say let user2 is equal to build user, and then in here we're going to say we want the name to be string from, and we'll do Tyler2. And then let's just go ahead and print out our username again to make sure that worked the way that we were intending. And that's exactly what we got. So we got Tyler2. So now, what are the tuple-like structs that we talked about? So remember, tuple-like structs identify the values by the order in which they appear. So if we come up here and we go struct and capital coordinates, then we can do I32, I32, and then I32. So now we can come down here and say, get rid of that. There we go. All right. So now we can say let chords equal coordinates 1, 2, 3. So it was able to say, okay, we have an I32, another I32, and another I32. And that's all there is to it for the tuple structs. So remember, tuple-like structs identify the values by the order in which they appear. But now, what about a unit-like struct? So a unit-like struct can be done like this. So now we have a unit-like struct. Well, what's the use of this? Well, we've actually already have used a unit struct prior in this course. When we did the 1 to 5 collect method when we were for like a range, when we were populating a vector, the ... is shorthand for the struct value range. So it's range, and it is set up from like start 1 and then end 5. So we will be able to see how these unit-like structs are a little bit more useful when we start to talk about traits a little later on in this course. But for now, the main structs we're going to be using are the named field ones. So what we need to do now is start looking at how we can implement methods on these structs.